Star Trek the original series is the long-forgotten show that started the Trekkie phenomenon as we know it today.
This is what you people don't understand. A man named Gene Roddenberry had a vision.
But beyond the commercialism, we must remember that Gene Roddenberry was trying to create something truly futuristic, and his mechanical, sterile future is the one that we are headed into now. Technology is becoming just as important in our world today as it was in his fictional universe, and yet humans never became obsolete. Roddenberry's brilliance was in creating a technologically advanced world that still prioritized humans, not as people who need to become robots and compete with tech, but as unique individuals, as the original creators who would always have a mastery over machines. In his world, technology is merely a tool. And in the modern world, where technology feels more like a threat and less a tool, when humanity feels like the lesser species, and the world feels on the precipice of the end, Star Trek can show us how to build a world that is mechanized and none of those things. It shows us how to value ourselves and humanity at large as more than just creatures of productivity, and subsequently builds a world that is fundamentally designed for humanity and human culture. Curious? We'll lay out the argument here today as we talk about Star Trek the original series. We are marching towards a digital future at a rapid pace. Though many would say that America is deeply divided, it seems obvious that we all feel at least a bit antiquated in the face of powerful technology. CEOs and leaders see it as an answer to lazy humans, but ordinary people, whether they are young or old, feel discomfort around it. Even young folks, fluent in TikTok, can't help but feel a creeping sense of inadequacy in the face of machines that could replace them. And older people can't help but dream and long for the analog past. These sentiments were at least partially behind the writer's strike last year, or as the writer Christopher Cantwell put it in his recent Substack email, it's hard not to feel that we don't matter. And yet, in the world of Star Trek, where machines are even more important than they are here today, people aren't obsolete. Star Trek is a show that needs no introduction or summary, but if you don't know, it takes place in the far future and involves humans exploring space, specifically Captain James Kirk and his crew as part of the Federation of Planets on the Starship Enterprise, seeking new planets and expanding their organization. Their world is highly mechanized and sterile, and they are humans who have transcended hate and petty squabbles to create peace and a utopia that they wish to spread to others. We could discuss the politics of that statement all day, but it was very much a 60s way of thinking. The original series is the most parodied, and a bit silly in the modern context, but it was incredibly revolutionary for its time, and not just because of the obvious social justice things, but because it imagined a world so radically different from the past. At this time, people were excited about the future. The country was young, unlike right now, and science fiction was a field concerned with imagining a better world, unlike today, which is obsessed with dystopia. Writers like Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov, Frank Herbert, and more had released books focusing on the positive side of the future, and as a result, it seems as though people liked humanity. There was a kind of unlimited potential for people back then. Anyone could grow up to be president. America was a wonderful place. Colonized nations all over the world had thrown off the chains of their oppressors and were hurtling towards development. This global optimism is visible in the storylines of Star Trek. People love to talk about science fiction in the context of science or social justice, but they tend to miss the obvious point. Science fiction as a genre is wrapped in the trappings of technology and other worlds, but it is the most human genre. When it's done well, it uses these trappings to hide fundamental truths about humanity, life, emotions, and all of the things that we would associate with the liberal arts. Similarly, the original fans of Star Trek love to talk about the science, math, and physics of it, the technical things that make the world immersive. But truly, Star Trek is a show about humans, and ironically, this is most visible in Mr. Spock, the ship's science officer. Spock is the only regularly featured alien. He is half Vulcan and half human. Vulcans are known for being stoic, unemotional, and logical above all else. Spock was mocked as a child on Vulcan for being half human, for feeling things and being inundated with endless human feelings on the starship. He chooses to remain as logical as he can. This is a constant source of friction between him and Dr. McCoy, the ship's medical officer, with Captain Kirk having to play mediator between the two. Spock is flesh, but he seeks to be as mechanical as possible. A satisfying storyline for him is when he is forced to recognize the value of his own emotions and instincts. He sees himself as inferior for being half-blooded, but he is a bridge between that which is alien and mechanized for humans. Quite literally sometimes when he mind melds with creatures that cannot communicate directly through language with humans. And we see the value of his humanness constantly, though he never seems to stop thinking of it as a detriment. We have value as creators of technology. Our emotions allow us to be stronger, smarter, and more more aware. If we look carefully, we can see in Star Trek the ways in which our human features are assets rather than liabilities. For example, while the computers aboard the ship can process data quickly, they cannot intuit things. In Conscience of the King, we see Kirk having a run-in with a war criminal named Kodos, who is masquerading as an actor in a traveling theater troupe that is performing on the Enterprise. Kirk is convinced the actor is not who he claims to be, but there is no logical reason for this to be the case. There is little evidence of deceit, but when those who had witnessed Kodos' crimes began to turn up dead, Kirk is certain it's not a coincidence. In the end, Kirk's intuition is correct, though he is doubted from the beginning, and Kodos meets with his untimely end during a skirmish on the ship. In the same way that machines cannot help with hunches, they cannot help with identifying their own issues. Take for example court-martial, in which Kirk is framed by an officer, and the computer is used to make him seem guilty of the officer's death. It's only when Kirk makes an offhand statement does Spock realize how to check if the machine is broken.
I've run a complete mechanized survey on the computer.
I'll tell you what you found. Nothing, right?
You sound bitter, Captain.
Not bitter enough to forget to thank you for your efforts.
Further instructions?
No, it's not all bad, Mr. Spock. Who knows? You may be able to beat your next captain at chess. Kirk out.
And sure enough, it is. And the officer is alive, hiding on the spaceship. Kirk and Spock use their intuition many times when solving problems, given that machines cannot. There are people who love to say that machines will one day be able to emulate humans, but intuition is something that we cannot even understand, let alone replicate. Similarly, human instincts are also important and one of a kind, and Spock learns this lesson the hard way in the episode The Galileo 7. Spock and a small landing party beam down to a quasar-like formation in order to study it, but end up on Taurus 2 instead, a foggy, rocky planet. It is inhabited by giant, ape-like creatures that see the landing party as a threat and begin to attack it. Spock attempts to frighten the creatures rather than attacking and killing them directly, despite them having killed one member of the landing party in the initial encounter. The landing party is able to get the ship fixed up, but when the creatures attack again, Spock is pinned under a rock. The rest of the party frees him, despite his objections, and they are able to take off. The Enterprise is already leaving the area after having searched for the landing party, when Spock fires off all of the remaining fuel, creating a kind of flare that Kirk happens to see, and the landing party is saved just minutes before the shuttle is nearly destroyed on re-entry. Spock won't admit to it, but he learned his lesson. In failing to adhere to human instincts of survival and killing the giants, he lost 2 of his crew members, but in playing a hunch and firing off the fuel as a flare, he was able to save himself and the rest of the landing party. And listen, this is not to say that emotions are always the best thing. Take Spock's refusal to give up control of the ship after the captain is attacked, even though his father needs surgery, and he needs to be in the surgery room as the blood donor. There are others who can take command, but his sense of duty is so intense, so stubborn. His feeling of guilt if he were to prioritize his father rather than his job. It nearly kills his father. Or when Kirk becomes obsessed with killing a vampire-like alien that comes aboard the ship because he had encountered it years before and failed to kill it then, costing his fellow crew members their lives. Or when an alien that feeds on hate and rage creates conflict between the Klingons and the Federation by introducing weapons and manipulating their minds. Obsession, hatred, rage, these are all potential dangers for humans, but they are also obstacles that we can overcome. And nothing is more important than our capacity for moral judgment and discernment, such as in Spectre of the Gun and in The Savage Curtain, in which man's capacity for good and evil is tested by aliens through certain scenarios. Take Day of the Dove, in which Chekhov, the ship's navigator, becomes convinced that the Klingons killed his brother. He becomes hysterical with rage when his navigating partner Sulu reveals,
"He never had a brother, he's an only child."
And more such incidents continue aboard the Enterprise, with Klingons trapped on the ship because their ship has been mysteriously destroyed. Weapons appear all over the ship, even antiques like swords, until the humans and Klingons are nearly locked in a battle. Finally, Spock and Kirk realize that there is an alien causing this madness, feeding on their emotions. Kirk convinces everyone to drop their weapons and start laughing to drive the alien away. It's a strange trick, but it works, because the alien feeds on hate and rage, and humans, and thankfully Klingons too, are not enslaved to their emotions. We have the power to choose how we feel, and it's a beautiful thing that's illustrated again and again in the series. But the original Star Trek also shows us how our darker selves are also allies in the mechanized world. Take for example This Side of Paradise, in which a planet doomed for destruction is ordered to evacuate to the Enterprise, but the residents refuse to leave. No one can figure it out until Spock is sprayed with spores from a flower on the planet. He becomes giddy and complacent, falling in love with one of the planet's residents. This is one of the few scenes in which Spock's emotions really come out. They're always there, but he chooses to bury them. The entire crew is slowly sprayed with spores as they come down to the planet to see what is happening. Kirk is affected as well, but frustrated by the situation, and overcomes the complacency. Kirk realizes that negative emotions like anger and frustration likely cause the effects to dissipate. He calls Spock up and yells at him, removing the influence of the spores from his mind as well. They are able to remove the influence of the spores on everyone on the the planet by sending down an irritating frequency and sowing discord among the people. Even anger, heartbreak, and frustration serve a purpose. They prevent complacency and disconnection from reality. In a highly mechanized and often alien world, even fear has a purpose, as Chekhov's fear protects him from a virus that rapidly ages everyone else on the crew. The adrenaline released by his instinct to be afraid of a rapidly aged dead person in front of him saved his life and the rest of the crew once they figured it out. We don't think of fear as a protective mechanism. It's just one more thing to get over so we can be productive and our best selves. We like to think that we know better, that somehow fear is nothing more than an obstacle. Yet, in the age where dangers like new illnesses, climate disasters, drugs, mobs, and more are rising, we should take action on that fear and see it as a protective mechanism, not something to get over so we can keep going. But the best episode that highlights our darker selves as being useful is The Enemy Within, where Kirk, due to a transporter malfunction, is split into two people. His violent and gentle selves are a mess, one running around attacking women on the ship, while the other incapable of making a decision about how to proceed and deal with his evil side as well as a crisis on the ship. Kirk realizes in this experience that he needs his darker self, because that is where he draws his strength and decisiveness from. He finally convinces the evil Kirk to go into the transporter with him because they need each other. This isn't something that even we psychologically enlightened folks of the modern age would like to consider, that the parts of us that are angry or aggressive might have some value, that perhaps in the age where tech CEOs want us to fade into obscurity, our anger is not only justified but keeps us living, or that without our aggression we might never be able to make hard decisions. Intuition, negative emotions, and let's not even talk about trickery and bluffing. These are just a few ways in which the humans of the Starship Enterprise beat out technology and aliens. In a world where computers run everything, humans are king because we are the creators. Star Trek doesn't just talk about how humans have the capacity for good, but also how technology is limited in what it can do, even in this world where it is central. There are 3 episodes in which a benevolent computer is shown to be running a society. Usually it's running things into the ground, creating total obedience or a cult, hiding reality from the inhabitants of the planet, taking control of their minds and bodies. We all would love to think that computers could run things better than us because they have logic. But the truth of these worlds shows that computers cannot deal with complex things like human free will, love, intimacy, and the complexities that make our world hard to govern, but also incredibly rich and interesting. Machines also lack moral judgment. In the case of the android in What Are Little Girls Made Of, Andrea the android cannot tell the difference between which Kirk is human and which is the android. She does not hesitate in killing him, not even realizing what she's doing. The androids in this show are highly sophisticated and lifelike, but the difference is always clear in the nuances of their behavior and what they themselves can understand. When the android Kirk insults Spock, he knows that something is wrong immediately, and in I, Mud, the crew of the Enterprise visits a planet filled with androids who are highly functional, and they cannot discern what is happening when the crew begins to act strangely, dancing around and posing the liar's paradox, confusing the androids who cannot handle contradictions. The same is the case with the Changeling, in which a machine that was sent out to explore the universe becomes corrupted after it merges with an alien being and begins destroying things that it deems imperfect instead. It thinks that Kirk is its creator because its creator was named Roy Kirk. It kills several crew members and eventually deems Kirk imperfect, preparing to destroy the Enterprise. But when Kirk points out that the machine itself is flawed because it thought Kirk was Roy Kirk, it cannot handle the contradiction. He also points out that it's not perfect because it didn't realize its own mistake and destroy itself upon their realization. Kirk and Spock are able to beam it to outer space with the command to destroy itself. Contradictions, moral judgment, complex thinking, these are things that the technology, even in this advanced world, just can't seem to handle. It's easy to be dazzled by machines and forget that we created them. In Star Trek, technology is a tool for bettering the world, removing obstacles, protecting oneself, researching human problems like food security and vaccines, caring for the sick and wounded. Now it's become nothing but a cure for the unmet emotional needs of greedy business leaders and politicians. They have turned tech into a tool for making money, and therefore it is limited by the constructs of money. They use it to heighten productivity, manipulate us, and fill the voids inside of them that can never be filled. But worshipping at the altar of machines without souls, they will never improve human conditions in a meaningful way. Our leaders would rather that we simply check out into technology, letting it run humanity into the ground, while they collect their dollars in the meantime. Technology, if used correctly, is both ethereal and physical. It offers us a chance to transcend the limitations of money. It should give us the space to be more creative and free us from mundane tasks so we can ponder higher truths, not check out into oblivion. We forget forget that modern technology is a product of the last few decades. Even modern civilization is only a few thousand years old. Humans, on the other hand, are products of a much longer time span, which is even tiny compared to that of Earth. We are all souls and spirits, ethereal beings connected to the cosmos and the Earth and to each other. Even the most advanced internet cannot be that. And it's funny that this is a lesson we learned from the mechanized and computer-filled world of Star Trek. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope that people still watch the original series because I think it really has some value even in modern times. If you liked it, please leave a comment below, subscribe, and do all the other good YouTube things, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!